All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Clayton Cuteri here with me on the show. Clayton is the host of the Traveling to Consciousness podcast and author of the book, The Secret Teachings of Jesus, a subject that is really, really fascinating and excited to dive in today. Hey, Clayton, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me, man. I know we've been planning this a while, so I know there's a lot of energy behind this conversation, and I'm ready to explore it.
Yeah. It's funny because, I was going to come on your podcast and then my time was so, you know, challenged, I guess you would say, just juggling a lot. And it's funny because I didn't even think of it because I have a travel company called Hello Vacay that's
Mm.
got so much going on right now that it's like, I'm going to have to postpone being on the Traveling to Consciousness podcast. Like, what can you do? Too much travel.
Well,
But
the invitation's always open, so I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, we'll make it happen one day for sure. And I'd like to start you off with my cliche opening question. And it is this: you're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Helping people discover the real power in their life and
Mm,
realizing that it comes from within instead of the outside world, which is a part of the illusion of this world.
mm. Yeah, definitely a pitfall that we all have to figure out how to sidestep. Looking out there for reassurance and fulfillment and etc. Name any of the good
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Well, if you would, man, share whatever feels relevant regarding your backstory. I always like to, myself and of course the listeners give them what like I said, whatever feels relevant to know who we're hearing from today.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you a high overview. If you want to dive into certain topics, I'll leave that up to you.
Cool.
Big picture, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was brought up within the Presbyterian faith, which is a denomination within Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Around high school ish, so it had probably been about 2010 ish. This was when the whole gay rights movement really started taking force, legalizing same sex marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that they decided to change the Bible. They said, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to change it from man and woman to two people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a preference, I'm all down for, giving the same rights to anyone who wants to get married.
Yeah.
But there was a piece of me that didn't understand how we were able to switch this text, which was the holy text, which was the
Right.
sacred text. How are we allowed to do that? So that kind of sent me questioning. I became a computer engineer, worked for 4 years as a military contractor, writing state of the art code for drones, for military drones.
Mm-hmm.
Realized that I was doing more destruction in the world than I was meant here to be. So I
Mm-hmm.
quit my job without a plan to travel the world and started my podcast. And along the way, I have found immense depth, immense growth, and even found teachings of Jesus that I believe should be included in the Bible. But that's a whole nother conversation that we might get into later. But that's the general place of why I'm here and how I got onto the Positive Heads podcast.
Cool. Amazing. I think that's really fascinating to go from programming drones, which, like you said, probably aren't, your code is probably being hijacked to do things that you're not morally aligned with, is what it sounds like, which makes total sense. Yeah, and so congrats to you for breaking away. Now, wasn't a big part of your journey, um, leading you to where you are now, going through like some psilocybin therapy?
Yeah, that was really what opened my eyes up to this. So when I was in San Diego and still working for the military industrial complex, I had a relationship with a girl,
Mm-hmm.
and we only dated for about a month and a half, and it was pure bliss. It was a relationship where we felt like we were dating for 6 months or knew each other for like almost a year,
Yeah.
and it didn't make any sense, and as a guy talk, as some locker room talk, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like the it was one of those captivated by sex relationships. Like there wasn't anything crazy that was happening in the bedroom. There was just this thing that I couldn't explain that was occurring.
Mm.
And at one point in time, she asked us, "What are we?" I
Mm-hmm.
melted down. My logical mind kicked in. My
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic nervous system just overreacted, and I didn't know how to answer that question. It was a
Yeah.
very valid question. I didn't know how to answer it. The relationship ultimately fell apart, which led me to doing and trying some psilocybin therapy, which showed me that sexual trauma from my childhood was running this program
Mm.
of destroying my intuition, eating up my ability to understand what love was.
Mm.
And so I was very disconnected from both of those things. And then 3 psilocybin sessions later, I got the intuition that I needed to do what I feared most. And at the time, that was quitting my job without a plan.
Wow.
And I just said, hell yeah to it. And it sent me on a wild journey that I'm still exploring to this day.
Wow. Yeah. If I had a nickel for every time someone said psilocybin played a key role in their journey, um, it's like it's such a recurring theme, and it's such an exciting thing to see how the legalization is sort of decriminalization is all kind of transpiring in a way like that marijuana did a while back. What state are you in?
Pennsylvania.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I don't know if it's like that there, the way it is here in California, but now, I mean, you can walk into, you know, smoke shops and find psilocybin a
Yeah.
lot of times. And, it's just like so prevalent. Do you see the same thing kind of occurring?
Uh,
Um,
California, I think, is definitely leading the charge on that.
yeah.
Here, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really experienced any strong way either way.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know people that grow their own, that,
Mm-hmm.
dispense it. Personally, I've kind of moved away from that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I
Mm-hmm.
always, did drugs, psychedelic drugs recreationally,
Mm-hmm.
but after the psilocybin, and I've even sat with ayahuasca,
Mm-hmm.
after
Me too.
those, I really don't have much of an affinity to go into psychedelics much anymore, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it's something that will start to evolve and make its way out to Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the same kind of experience. I've sat with ayahuasca half a dozen times. And, for many years, I did psilocybin very early in my awakening journey, you could say. And then for a very long time, I didn't have an interest in partaking anymore. And recently I've started microdosing. Um,
Mm.
actually I did today, like nootropic with like lots of other, you know, uh, functional mushrooms as well as like low dose, and I find that I really am enjoying that. And,
I've done that.
so,
I've done the microdosing with sports back in the day. And
uh,
dude, I've had
yeah,
some profound experiences where I can like see the play unraveling before it even happens.
yeah. Wow.
And there's a part of me that
I've
thinks I'm a
heard
little,
that a bunch. Like, yeah,
yeah.
I've heard that thing with sports. Other people say that.
Well, the time that I kind of saw it, but I was like, okay, maybe I'm just tripping a little here.
Yeah, right.
But the time that really stuck out to me was we were playing volleyball. And for those who don't know, volleyball, you get 3 hits, then you got to hit it
Mm-hmm.
over. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were playing in team 4v4. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a time that we hit it over to the other team. One
Mm-hmm.
person, had the first hit. And then right after the second person threw the ball in the air, I
Mm-hmm.
said out loud, "I got it."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the third person hit it and the ball came straight at me.
Wow.
And I didn't realize what had happened until the kid beside me was like, "Dude, did you just call that like 3 people before or 2
Yeah.
seconds before it was hit?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess I did." Like,
Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Which is really interesting because, I think back to having Dean Radin on the podcast.
Mm,
I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or not, but he runs the
I
Institute of
am.
Hypnotic Sciences,
Yeah.
and talking about some of the scientific research they've done with precognition stuff, like showing um, images on a screen to people and hooking up monitors to them and noticing that people react before, like if they're going to show something really traumatic or beautiful, they can see the difference a split second before the thing is actually shown on the screen, which is a very fascinating piece of research. One that's kind of like it sort of proves this precognitive ability. So it makes sense that if you use something like, psilocybin, even at a low dose, it's just like amplifying this innate ability within us, that's there already, right?
Yeah, you're bringing that third eye online. And
Yeah.
this even goes deeper. I mean, there's no shortage of prophetic visionaries like Nostradamus, or there was one lady who was in a hurricane, or she was in a tornado and lost her vision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was it Veda something or Vera something? But she had like all these tons of predictions. And I mean, we try to visualize, right? Like in this study, it's only a split second before, but there's people who have been able to predict events that transcend hundreds of years, which is profound in its own right.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, it's wild. It's wild, and like I said, what's cool out here is, people are, it's loosened up so much and decriminalized. And then other countries, I have a friend who's in a place where, he's very comfortable with like microdose, sending it out to people and stuff. So I've thrown it out on the show. Like it's where I'm taking it from an old friend who's, doing that. So I told people, go check it out. If you're somewhere where it's still hard to get, and he has like a whole process. You go, it's called The Great Mother. If you go to the great.mother on Instagram and you just, who are you? Where'd you hear about us? That kind of thing. I mean, I think it's just a matter of time till it's like in every state, in every, kind of like
For
now
sure.
I drive around, I drive around in LA and it's like every other billboard is a weed sign, it's like,
Yeah.
I remember growing up on the East Coast as well. Like, I mean, my friend almost went to jail for life for growing weed. Like, it's
So
crazy to think
crazy.
about.
Yeah, and what's feeling called to me is, to put the asterisk there, is that with, this great power, the great power of this medicine, comes great responsibility.
For sure.
So if someone is thinking about or considering this, it's very advantageous to know that there are risks involved. This isn't
Sure.
like a perfect drug by any means,
Of course
or
not.
perfect plant. So definitely setting are important. Make sure you're doing your due diligence, and,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know, definitely be careful with them.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I definitely agree with all of that. Being in the right setting, having some, especially if it's like your first time and you're doing something other than a microdose, a macrodose, then make sure you have, someone around to support and make sure that, yeah, you want to be in the right container. It's not take a bunch and go, go out and go to the theme park necessarily. Although people do stuff like that, usually wait until you understand the substance, before you
Yeah.
ever go there. But I think the most benefit is like in a more ceremonial, put on an eye mask, have someone there to hold space, some beautiful music, some incense, and
Have a good
go within.
intention.
Yep, good
Yeah.
intention. Set your intention. Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm really curious about um the research that you've done into the secret teachings of Jesus, and I know you have one book out and more forthcoming, all around this subject. And of course, I'm aware of some of the books that were left out, and Gospel of Thomas, and you hear a fair amount about that. I've never went really deep into researching it. I did actually read a book years ago, and I had a lot of crazy synchronicity and spiritual breadcrumbs, as I like to call them, around the book and some of the
Mm.
messages in the book. It's a book called the Messengers, by G.W. Harden. You could get it for free online on his website, and yeah, this guy supposedly was doing hypnotherapy and went into a full past life remembrance as Paul, I think, the apostle. And so the Messengers is just about him over 6 months going into this state and his documenting
Whoa.
his whole time with Jesus. And it's a fascinating book. And there's all this, like at 4:44 a.m. He would have 4:44 is like the angelic frequency. He assessed, through his experience. He would have beings appearing in his room, when not in the, under hypnosis. He'd have beings appear in his room, angels, and all kinds of spirit communication, angelic communication at 4:44 a.m. He would get these
Wow.
crazy downloads. And what was crazy about it for me, Clayton, is I just read the book and I was telling my friend about, like, it was really good. It's like, this firsthand account of, with Jesus, supposedly. Right. And I was telling my friend about it. Yeah. And, these angels would communicate with the guy at 444. That's the angelic frequency, and through like electricity sometimes and things like that. And as I'm telling my friend this, the alarm, like the smoke detectors in my house go off. It's like midnight or something. And I'm like, what, someone cooking downstairs? Is there something burning? Nope. Just went off. Like 3 hours later, we were up super late that night. I think actually some psychedelics were involved. And now 3, 4 in the morning, someone tags me on social media, something about referring to an angel, right? Or referring to me as an angel, something like that. I was like, whoa, I just got tagged with something about an angel. Went off again. The smoke detector instantly. Yeah. So a book you might be interested in checking out. It's not like real prevalent out there or anything, but the reason I came across it, my friend grew up. The author is a lifetime family friend or something. And
who was I wrote down the Messenger's book, but it looks like there's a lot out there.
G.W. Hardin, Hardn.
Hardn.
Yep.
Harden.
Hardin. Sorry. Hardin. No A. D-I-N.
Okay.
You got it.
G.W.
Hardin. Yep.
Hopefully someone can follow that.
Yeah, exactly. The Messenger is a true story of angelic presence. It looks like.
And then there's also one 14 years later. So it looks like he did a follow-up.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that.
Or maybe I'm just reading the title.
You could get it free on his website. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but yeah, I recommend it.
All right. Adding it to the list.
Cool. So enough about that book. Let's hear about your book and the research that you've done into this topic. And yeah, I'm very curious to hear what you've uncovered in your journey.
Well, it's there's a lot that have kind of uncovered and kind of came to me throughout this. I guess the first question is why this book, right? If I'm going to write a book, if I'm going to put my effort into it, why is it this one?
Yeah.
I started out, look, I came from a computer software engineer background, and then I transitioned into media, which could not be further from the dilemma of figuring out what to do.
Yeah, you don't seem to have the personality of the typical programmer, based off of my experience dealing with developers.
Yeah. Well, that's because I was like later, through this whole experience, I've definitely become more sociable, more personable. So it's I'm definitely a new person. I'm not the same person I was back in the day. But, transitioning out of that, starting this podcast, a part of that's like, okay, well, how are people going to find you? Well, I got to make content. Where are you going to make content? All right, short form reels and TikTok seem to be the thing. So on TikTok, I would kind of just make these weird videos that I felt were interesting. Here's a cool idea. I'll put this out here. And then the very first time I came across this website, which basically gave like a whole quick little summary of the Gospel of Thomas. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I start reading some of the verses, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of alignment here with the things the spirituality community talks about, the things that Jesus is here quoted saying. And for those who haven't seen the Gospel of Thomas before, it's 114 just sayings of Jesus. So the Bible is kind of like a story. This is more just like sayings that have incredible wisdom behind them. So I made a TikTok video, a 3-minute video, saying these basic concepts that I found in the article, and then led off with the very first verse, which is Jesus said, those who, maybe I should find the actual verse. Let me get you guys the actual verse.
Keep in mind too, this is one that was, the Bible and the New Testament specifically that we're talking about here, Jesus's life is really where the New Testament comes into play, right? It's a conglomerate of, for those who don't know, most probably do, of different writings over long period of time that then were put together into one binder essentially, and said, okay, we'll keep this, we'll exclude this, we'll keep this writing, we'll keep this, right. and then it's been edited to some degree to To what degree, who knows? And that's what we call the Bible today. But it's not like one guy sat down and wrote the Bible, right? It's like a bunch of writings. And this is one that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years because it was excluded, and yet, there's some very profound wisdom, right? Would
Oh,
you say that's
very profound. So, Gospel of Thomas, verse 1, Jesus said, "Whoever finds out what these sayings mean will not taste death,"
mm,
which always struck me as very fascinating because, especially the Catholic Church, but also sort of the church that I grew up in, was like, okay, you have to find Jesus. If you don't find Jesus, you can't talk to God. If you can't get with God, you're going to go to hell when you die. You're not allowed to
mm-hmm.
go to heaven. And,
Yep.
these contradictions come up that just don't make sense. So, let's also take a quick step back into what you were talking about, which was the creation of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus lived, a lot of people don't know this, but Jesus actually lived between was born between somewhere between 4 and 6 BC, and then lived until about 25-ish AD.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened is over the next 200, 300 years, small sects of Christianity started to form around his teachings.
Yeah.
They, some of these had different gospels, different books that they agreed upon, some that they didn't agree upon. And what happened is around 325-ish AD,
Mm-hmm.
there started to form these councils, which would take some of the head priests from these individualized sects and say, okay, let's basically come together and create one solid formed, organized religion around Jesus's teachings to display to the masses. And at this point, I think there's a bunch of different factors that go into play as to why they picked the gospels and things that they selected. There is some, how do I want to say it? Some criteria that they used that I had found, which were mainly 4 things. Number 1 was it was written by one of Jesus's disciples or someone who knew or talked to them.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, it was written in the 1st century AD when Jesus lived or soon after he was crucified.
Mm-hmm.
3 was it was consistent with the other books that they believed were inspired by God. And 4, accepted by most of the churches as valid or helpful for their faith. And something I found interesting, it's the Gospel of Thomas really, in many ways, fills all of these requirements. Thomas was one of Jesus's disciples.
Right.
Therefore, it had to have been written in the 1st century AD. And maybe where it's interesting and it gets interesting is when it talks about being consistent with other books, because this is where it starts to get a little fuzzy. Where I see that the Bible teaches is it focuses on the devotion aspect of God. So in order to bring this in, we need to talk about this Indian mystic I've come across who's Paramahansa Yogananda. Have you heard of him before?
Oh, yeah. Yes, of course.
So Paramahansa, incredible guy. If your listeners haven't heard of him before, highly recommend the autobiography of a yogi.
Yep.
Completely changed my life. He has these 9 lesson plans, or I guess 18 lessons that he does over 9 months that you can do. And so I've been doing those. And one of the things that he talks about, which is the 10 manifestations of God. Now, what this means is that God can manifest because he's this all-pervading, unseen energy force that lives beyond space and time. So the way that he manifests in our experience in our world are through these 10 ways, according to Paramahansa, which is light, sound, vibration, which is also known as the Holy Ghost, intelligence, love, peace, calmness, bliss, devotion, and the one that the Gospel of Thomas focuses on, which is wisdom. So, let's take this information now back to the Bible, where I believe that the aspect or manifestation of God that they were following was devotion. They were saying to themselves, does this passage invoke devotion to Jesus, to God,
Right,
or does it not? Now, whether or not there were some nefarious actors at plebe who saw devotion as a good way to seize control of people,
and then the path to devote yourself is through me and my
it's a
power.
good way to challenge people. Are you questioning me? Are you not devoted
right,
to what I'm saying?
right.
It's a good mode of control. I'm not going to say that was everybody, but I think when these big decisions happen, there have to be multiple factors that are taken into account.
Yeah.
And where this gets interesting is when it comes to wisdom. So, what I see in the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic text, is wisdom. So, Gnosticism, for your audience, you might already know this, is all based around the idea of gnosis. And gnosis is a Greek word which means knowledge or wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So, what the Gnostics believe is that you can obtain Christ-like abilities, you can become Christ aligned with Christ consciousness through wisdom, through deeper
Yeah.
understanding of the world, of the fabric of reality in which we live, and that will grant you liberation and salvation and freedom from hell, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
so all of this kind of comes together and is what has created this reason that, in my opinion, the Gospel of Thomas was left out of the Bible. And then I guess I'll leave it at that. And then there's like more elements as to how we found the Gospel of Thomas, but I want to leave some space if you have questions or anything you want to add.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, the thing that comes to mind when you say that, it's like, okay, it focuses more on the wisdom and empowering the individual versus devote to this thing external of yourself, right?
Right. So a way to even look at this, and the way that essentially humans work, the way that we were created is through a divine spark. And this is also something that Gnostics preach, which is that there's a divine spark of God within all of us,
Right.
in me, and you, Brandon, and the audience and the listeners. There's a
I think
divine
of
spark.
sorry, I want to just
Yeah, go
interject
ahead.
there. I think of a near death experience or who I had on the podcast a while back, who had, in his experience, he was shown all of mankind, and
Wow.
this little spark that was in each and every divine spark that was in every single human, and he could see it all simultaneously in his, near death experience. Like,
That'd be
so
wild.
I think that's really interesting to hear that sort of thing. And I feel like I've heard it before through others, whether
Hmm.
using, a plant medicine or seeing something or perceiving something like that or other near death experiences. But it's
No, that's
interesting
cool.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, everything that I've found has aligned with me. And I think it's also valid at this point. I do want to point out, like, all these things that I'm saying, I really want to refrain people from taking it and just regurgitating it. I want to
Yep.
encourage everybody to figure out and test the things that I'm saying. This is where
Yep.
like the beauty of science comes in, is test the things that I'm going to talk about here and even in this book, which is very applicable. Like, you can do it. You can actually test the things that are going to be said and disclosed here and I think the beauty of this is to avoid that dogma,
Mm-hmm.
avoid being
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, Clayton has all the answers. Like, I'm not
Right.
here to do that. I'm here to
Right.
help you fester that divine spark that's within you.
Right.
So in my mind, the next question becomes is like, okay, there's a divine spark within us, but all I see is this physical body. I have skin. I have, my senses are taste, touch, feel, sight, hearing. I don't really have anything else. And then this kind of parallels what we were talking earlier with that third eye. So we all have this divine spark. And then I don't know if this is going to get a little bit too high level. He touches on this in the autobiography of a yogi. So I guess we'll just briefly go over this,
Mm-hmm.
where we're encased in three bodies essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
the divine spark is encased in the causal body, and the causal body. Oh, sorry. Let me backtrack here. Let me go from the other direction. So we're this physical form. So this is our physical. It's also known as the gross body, and this is just because it's the densest body in existence.
Mm-hmm.
And what's underneath the physical body is the astral body. So this is like what happens when you're dreaming. You might hear
Mm-hmm.
about people who astral project. This is also where that intuition or that foresight comes from whenever you're tapped into your third eye.
Mm-hmm.
And the astral body in cases, so inside the astral body is a causal body. This is where cause and effect, laws of karma, that all exists. And so inside the causal body is now where we find that divine spark. And the idea is that we need to be able to shed our layers, shed the physical, shed the astral, shed the causal, in order to become aligned with that divine spark. And once you embody that purest divine spark of yourself, is whenever you essentially become in contact with God. This is whenever people have the power to come back to earth, to become prophets, to help other people ascend. And this is where Jesus comes back into play, is that he fundamentally, through the power of reincarnation and shedding his previous skins, he was able to transcend the physical, transcend the astral, and transcend the causal to embody that purest divine spark.
Yeah.
Then, being that, he decided to reincarnate in order to be what is then called also in Eastern philosophy as an avatar. So Jesus was in sense an avatar, a divine spark of God that came in order to show us the way to transcend this physical reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty profound to think about, and also to think about the idea that, and the concept that we're all somewhere on that same journey. I would say, and it's like he's sort of like, I guess if you're looking from a linear time perspective, here's someone leading the pack. It's like, not that there's not other avatars, or but
For sure.
there's other bands, but there's only one Beatles, right? And it's like, so it's kind of, that's how I sort of equate it. And this idea that you hear about, of course, in the more traditional Christian beliefs and books in the Bible, this idea of Jesus returning. And I personally believe that idea is just been a little confused and misinterpreted. It's like Jesus was a man who died. Jesus is not coming back. Christ is a state of consciousness that is pervading the planet more than ever, and is returning, if you will. Whereas, I think of it in the terms, I've been on a spiritual journey for over 20 years. And when I first was on this path of remembering and awakening to, the truth of, I guess, the ultimate nature of reality, and that we're one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things, I would look around and no one was really thinking about that, experiencing that. It was like, what are you smoking, dude, if you talk about it? And then now I go, I'm surrounded. I go to transformational festivals and things like that, where every 21-year-old is like, duh, of course I know I'm, one with source. Like, so it's like Christ consciousness seems to be, coming back, if you will, in a more pervasive way. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this idea of Jesus the man versus Christ consciousness, the state or energy, if you will.
I think you're hitting it right on, nail on the head. And I try to, because I think our world and the society we're living in looks outwards so much, and this kind of goes back to that power thing that we were discussing, where it's all
Right.
within inside you and it's not outside you as much as you want to believe it is, or
Right.
the society would have you believe. So when we're talking about Christ consciousness, I see it as us. So yes, Jesus lived and he talked about the second coming of Christ, which is interesting. He didn't say the second coming of Jesus. He said the second
Right.
coming of Christ, and Christ is a state of consciousness, like you said. So what he's saying is the Christ within yourself, your ability to align with Christ consciousness, which is
Right.
essentially the step right below God consciousness or cosmic consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
is Christ consciousness. And it's a part of this ladder. And another way to break that down even is, many people, probably not as many as people on your podcast that are listening, are in what's body consciousness. So this is
Mm-hmm.
egoic consciousness. I am afraid of certain things. I need certain things in order to survive. Where I would say your audience, and probably my audience as well, and me myself, and probably you yourself, are more aligned with like soul consciousness. So
Mm-hmm.
we're in tune with our soul. What nourishes our soul? How does our soul become more embodied? How do we keep evolving as souls? And then there's the next step up, which then becomes Christ consciousness, which, I don't know, maybe there are people listening, and it's hard for me to articulate. I don't think I'm at Christ consciousness personally, but that would be like the next step. And then we have
Mm-hmm.
like cosmic consciousness. And so it's this ever little bit going process of the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And it seems to me, this is something that they talk about in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is it seems to me that the reason that I still have my physical or gross body, the one that you're looking at right now, the one everyone's listening to, is because I still have desires in the gross or material world. And
Mm-hmm.
then what seems to happen is that once I transition out of this world, I go to the astral plane, and I will be in the astral plane as long as I have astral desires and wishes and fulfillments.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm able to drop those astral desires, that's whenever I then transcend and go into the causal plane. And then once I drop all my causal wishes and desires, that's when you then rejoin with God, as Jesus did before he incarnated. And what's interesting is that it seems to me that the 3 days of Jesus being crucified and then being resurrected was to symbolize those three things.
Mm.
There's also a verse in the Gospel of Thomas, which isn't in the book I just wrote, but will be in the next one, which is verse 11,
Mm-hmm.
where Jesus talks about this. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. But he talks about like this heaven and the one above it. Let's see
Mm.
here. So, Gospel of Thomas, verse 11. Jesus said, "This sphere of heaven will perish, and so will the one above it. What is dead is not alive, and what is alive will not die. And the days when you ate what was dead, you brought it to life. When you step into the light, what will you do? In the days when you were one, you split into two. When you split into two, what will you do?" Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but if
Yeah.
but fixating on that very first line, this sphere of heaven will perish, and so will the one above it. To me, that's saying that whenever we're talking about heaven right now,
Mm-hmm.
there's many ways to interpret this, but the first way that we're talking about it is something above us. And I think that that's the astral plane. We think that the astral plane is heaven when we're
Yeah. Right.
personifying this as being higher. It's
Yeah.
because it's of a higher frequency, or it's of less density.
Yep.
And so then what he's saying is that that level of heaven will disappear, the one above it. So astral heaven will disappear, and then we'll be looking at the causal heaven. And so then that's whenever it comes into him saying, "And this sphere, and so will the one above it, and so will the causal, that's the one that's above it." And that's then whenever you're able to rejoin. So there's, in essence, let's say two more levels of heaven for us to go through.
It's interesting because you hear people talk in about this sort of thing referring to dimensions, right? It's like
Hmm.
this being third dimension, and then astral being like fourth dimension, and then once you transcend those, fifth dimension is like another level of like where the Jesus would reside, and kind of, so it sort of mirrors. Of course, there's a lot of different thoughts and ideas out there around such things, but it definitely is resonant of things that I've heard in regards to, okay, these, where we're at, kind of one street over, if you will, they're sort of still very immersed in separation energy, and as you go up the ladder, it, of course, becomes less of the like after the fourth, after the astral, it's you no longer have the sort of dichotomy of, good and evil, or left and right, or up and down, or male
Yeah.
and female, or all of that. It's sort of more of a unifying plane of existence, which is more foundational, and never is not, if you will.
Yeah, I had I this is an interesting conversation because I had Rubia Lacerda on my podcast, and at one point she started channeling like the 9D Arcturian Light Council.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
one of the questions I had was like tied really tightly to this, which was essentially like, what is correct? Like, are
Yeah.
there 9 dimensions? Is there the astral and the causal? Like, what's going on here? And a rough estimate of her answer was essentially, there's all these different things because there's different people. We're going
Yeah.
to resonate with different things. Like
Yeah.
she was saying that Rubia and the 9 Arcturian Council, they had essentially a soul contract in order for them to partner up and do this mission on Earth. And they're going to
Mm-hmm.
help her with her karma and whatnot. And they were like, the choice is essentially yours. When they were talking to me, they're like, you can keep following this Hinduism if you want. You can change and go to spirituality. It's like they're saying you can mix and match and use whatever you want in order to get to Christ consciousness. I think what the underlying thing was, I don't know that they explicitly said this, is for you to actually, and this is where devotion comes, is devote yourself to one of those paths. Because if you keep switching around, changing things, it'll create a lot of confusion in your world. And so it's super beneficial to you, your soul, and transcending if you're able to, okay, I'm going to just focus on, my angels. I'm just going to focus on this and elevate myself through this message. And, there's more than one ways to skin a cat. And I think the same thing comes when we're talking about getting to Christ consciousness.
More than one way to peel a potato is my new, less harmful way to.
Okay.
I started saying that of like a year or so ago. I'm like, hold on, there's got to be another way to say this.
Peel a potato. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. I'll have to start using that.
Yeah.
It is a graphic imagery.
Yeah, because I said it to someone and they're like winced, like and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of gnarly, like.
All right, peel a potato. That's the new world expression.
Yeah. You heard it here first, folks.
I'll co-sign that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, I can go from, I'm in California, you're in Pennsylvania. I can take a lot of routes to get to you and vice versa. Or it's like, if I go across the 40, it takes me pretty much straight shot across the country. There's a north and a southern route, and they both will get you there with different scenery and some different experiences along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I mean, even think of it from the perspectives like taking a step back and assuming you have God consciousness. How fun would it be, or would it really be that fun if everybody just was a Gnostic? Would it really be that fun if everybody was a Christian? It's like, where would be the shadow
variety
and
is
the
the
light?
spice of life. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And he's, purveying it all. So, he's not going to have these, cut and center things like you have to find Paramahansa in order to get there. You have to find Jesus. It's like, no, there's multiple ways here, but we need to figure out our way in discerning which way is the right way for us.
Yeah. That makes sense. I don't know if you're familiar with, what is the Book of Secrets by Osho?
No, you're giving me all kinds of books.
Yeah, check out the Book of Secrets by Osho, which is it's all tantric philosophy and like these ancient texts, Vedic texts that he is interpreting. It's like, I want to say it's 100 plus, texts, words that were shared by Vishnu to. I might be getting this wrong, but the gods, the Jesus of that world,
Krishna.
Yeah. I feel like it's Vishnu and there's another V. I'm going blank on the names of the male female counterpart.
Would it be Kali? Maybe not Kali.
It's I'm gonna look it up real quick just because.
Yeah, do your thing, man. Let's get these people the facts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not seeing, it's not ringing a bell looking it up, but there's like Lakshmi and like, so anyway, regardless, the book itself takes these texts that are all supposedly techniques that he was sharing with his lover as to how to attain enlightenment. And it's, the way Osho frames the book, and of course Osho is controversial in and of himself, but I'm one of those people. I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of his teachings and perspectives are the most profound I've come across. Yeah, he just kind of breaks down these verses and then like, here's what I think it means. And it's all just different techniques. And he's like, so one or multiple will be the path for you. So explore and find out what is ideal for you. And so that's what it makes me think of. And it's a very big, robust book, but really fascinating. Like, hey, here's many paths that lead to the same spot. Which one are you going to, and try these different exercises?
Yeah, just a process of feeling into it too. Because I know that's what happened with me and Paramahansa, which was just all right, he keeps saying things and it's just lighting up my soul. So why not keep following this? And I've been doing his SRF lessons for almost like 4.5 months now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been some of the most enlightening and soul growth moments of my life. And again, not going to say that's for everybody, but whatever my path is, maybe I have some sort of connection to Paramahansa from a past life or something. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I'm on this path to follow it. It's a good one for me.
Yeah.
It's a good one for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. There you go. Well, I'm curious in, all your sort of deep dive into these sort of, lesser known teachings of Jesus. What are some of the things that sort of jumped out as you as the most, um, you know, profound or,
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the first one, number one, verse one was really, I was like, what do you mean we get to transcend death? Like those who understand this. And, this is really our first scene of wisdom that came in. Let me see here. Number 7 was also a really cool one because, so for those who don't know, I train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And within the MMA scene, like people don't know this, but people who train martial arts are some of the nicest people in the entire world. And there's something about the idea of grappling with pun intended, I guess, not intended, but grappling with death where where you understand the world at a different level, if you will. Like you come in tune with your ability to be evil. And I know Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, but once you are able to understand your potential for tyranny and destruction and evil, you are then able to become truly a good person. Like you can't be weak and a good person. Like it just doesn't exist. And so verse 7, the Gospel of Thomas, verse 7, Jesus said, "Blessed is the lion that is eaten by a human, so that the lion becomes human. And cursed is the human that is eaten by a lion, so that the lion becomes human." And that verse to me just absolutely nails exactly what we're talking about in regards to martial arts, which is a lion. So let's break this down a little bit. So blessed is the lion that is eaten by a human, so that the lion becomes human. So you're blessed if you're able to see the worldliness of you, that beast that lives within you, that is willing to carry out, to tear apart, to maim anything in its way in order to sustain life. However, and you're cursed, and it even says, and cursed is the human that is eaten by the lion. So if the lion eats you and you become essentially the lion, you are now going to carry out the malevolence, the tyranny, that destruction on world, which is, there's no shortage. I'm sure people already have 10 examples that come to mind of people who have been consumed by that lion. However, we become blessed if we're able to take a step back, realize we have that potential, but then able to conquer it within ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. It's like, what comes to mind when you bring that up is I love the Matrix movies. And I don't know if you remember the guy. Have you seen all the Matrix movies?
Oh, yeah.
Seems like you would have. And the fight scene with, I forget his name, Asian guy who is the protector of the Oracle. And when Neo's first trying to get to the Oracle, and he's like, he has to fight her bodyguard essentially. And he's like, you don't really know someone until you fight them, And so that was his test to make sure that Neo was worthy of seeing the Oracle. And so
Okay.
that's what comes to mind for me. But
I mean, it's a perfect example, right? Because Neo has to go to that place of his ability to understand malevolence and tyranny and aggression and anger.
Yeah, right.
And if he's not in tune with that, then there's no ability for him to transcend it.
Yeah.
You can't transcend something if you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So you have to become aligned with it. You have to understand what it feels like whenever it's going to take you over, so that you're able to transcend it and not act on those impulses.
Yeah. Yeah. I looked it up. I found it because it was driving me crazy. The original text is called, I may butcher this, I'll do my best, Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, where Shiva shares 112 meditation techniques with his consort Shakti. And so, and then it's Osho just like interpreting them, you know, because they can be kind of like cryptic and like, okay, what is he
Sure.
really saying here? And all techniques to attaining enlightenment, essentially. So,
Cool. I'll
yeah,
check that out.
yeah, very cool. Wow, I can't believe we're almost in an hour already. That's really, time flies.
You see why I gotta do 3 hours for mine?
Yeah, I see. We got to get better at bending time and space, man.
Working on it.
When we fully attain Christ consciousness, no problem.
Right.
Oh man. Well, curious, you know, as we sort of start to wind down a little bit here, what is it out of all your deep study of this epic topic that is your, if you had to summarize, you know, in our world of 10-second clips, like, you know, what would you summarize as your takeaway from your research into the secret teachings of Jesus?
Whether it was on purpose or accidental, a lot of Jesus's teachings have been misconstrued and misunderstood, and the true nature of them are so much more beautiful, so much more in alignment, so much more helpful than what we're led to believe. And when we're understanding the deepest meaning of his words, there's no contradictions. There's no dogma. There's no stepping on your own feet. It all makes sense. And furthermore, and I even put this in the book, after you read these texts or read my interpretations, read whatever, read the Bible and come back to it, there's always more profound meaning. So we need some sort of engagement in this world in order to understand the words at a deeper level. So it's always good to revisit them. And I feel like those are the two corollaries. One, it's so much more powerful than we can even conceptualize. And two, they become even more powerful once we have real world experience to apply to his words.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Well, I'd like to hear from you. You know, one of my kind of go-tos on the show is I love to hear stories of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story. And I'm curious if you have something fun to share.
Oh, I have a good one. It is a little dark. It's a little but I think it would be helpful.
Okay.
I'm down to share it. Are you okay if
right.
it's like a little heavy, if you will?
I mean, we've shared heavy things before, that's for sure. So
Okay. So I'll just put it out there as viewer discretion advised, because I know that this could rile up some emotions within people.
Okay.
So this was the story of my first experience with the Akashic Records, which I did a whole podcast on, and the full thing is like 40 minutes long, but I'll give you a quick synopsis. So growing up, porn has had a stranglehold on my life up until maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, where I really have been starting to conquer that beast. Still got a little bit more to go, but I've at least reduced the intake substantially. Now, I think the big question is what has helped in that? What has helped in alleviating that addiction? So in my endeavors, what I've noticed, and I've heard other people echo this, is that whenever you start developing a porn addiction, the vanilla stuff doesn't keep doing it for you. You start finding deeper and deeper stuff that is super niche and super individualized specifically for you.
Yeah.
And now flash forward. So how old was I? Maybe 25, 26. This was right whenever I quit my job. 3 months later, I'm in Brazil. I'm living there. And so I lived in Brazil for 2 months. And at one point in time, and at this point in my journey, I started realizing I was in this mindset of like, oh, all of this stuff is trauma. So if I have something in this reality that I don't like, it was likely an event from my past that is shaping me for who I am.
Sure.
It got to this point where I couldn't figure out what that was with porn. So here's where I get a little vulnerable, and maybe the language might trigger some people. But the porn that I was very deep into was essentially gangbang. So one girl, bunch of dudes, and for some reason, big dudes, jack dudes, big genitalia, trying to keep this PG at least a little so you can use it on YouTube. And I couldn't figure out why, because there was nothing in, let's say, this lifetime that was telling me that I should be averse to this. Like, why is it this? Why does this one piece of porn have so much of a stranglehold on me?
When you say you're averse to it or drawn to it?
Drawn to it. Did I say averse? Yeah, I meant drawn. Yeah. Words get weird with me sometimes.
Yeah, no. I figured that's what you meant. Okay.
Yeah, I'm drawn to it. Why am I so strongly drawn to it?
Yeah.
And so at the same time, another parallel that was happening is I was becoming aware of the Akashic Records. For those who don't know, the Akashic Records, things we've been kind of talking about here, is the library of everything. All information that has ever existed, will ever exist, is in the Akashic Records. So I thought to myself, I was like, okay, I'm having these two conundrums in my life. Let me see if there's a way I can mesh the two. So I found a really cool little hill in Porto Alegre, Brazil, to sit on. Took a nice little seat, cleared some area for me to sit on this grass, plugged my headphones in, plugged them into my phone, found a little 30-minute meditation on YouTube that helps you get into the Akashic Records. So I sat there, I hit play and set my intention, which was to figure out what was going on with this porn thing. So it walks you through it. It's like, okay, you're sleepy, you're calm, you're relaxed. You're going to see a door, open up this door, walk through the door. Okay, there's another door. There's a book on this door. Go into the door. All right, now you're in this whole hall, this library. If you look to the left, you see a librarian. You ask this librarian to see the book that is your soul. And so then she leads you. And I'm telling you, as I'm going through this, I'm seeing with my third eye.
Strong visual, yeah.
Yes, very strong visual with my third eye. And it's weird because it's just like the psilocybin therapy, where if you're trying to use your physical eyes to look, it's all dark, but you can tap into this third eye that exists, that opens up. And so I'm seeing just this all glass, beautiful ice kind of like library that I'm in. And she leads me down. I still remember to this day, it's four aisles down and then about 16 books in. And she's like, here's your book. And so I put it on like a little easel or a table, and the narrator's like, okay, open this book. I open it up. It's completely blank. And she's like, on the first page is your name, is your soul name.
Wow.
And it said Igor. And I was like, okay, my first thing was to dismiss it.
Yeah.
I was like, no, that is not my soul name.
Not the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah. All right. Which is interesting because I started reading another book. This is like now if I flash forward 8 months in the future, I started reading another book which was called Ask Your Guides. I forget who wrote it, but it was really good. And in it, she has her own little thing to find your soul name. And what I came to was Igor again. And I was like, no way. I start laughing. And she's like, yeah. And if you start laughing or have some sort of energetic release, this confirms that it's that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this lady.
Wow.
So that was a small synchronicity. But then coming back to me being in the Akashic Records, she goes, flip the page. Okay, so now I'm no longer seeing my name. It's just blank page. And she's like, there's a reason you came here. Ask it the reason that you're here. So I'm like, okay, why is this porn have such a stranglehold on my life? And what pops up on the page, it's like some shit straight out of Harry Potter, where, it starts moving the page and it brings forth this scene as if it's like a watercolor just bleeding onto the page. And I see this guy sort of chained up in this medieval dungeon.
Yeah.
And, he's beaten to shit. There's, marks all over him. He's kind of just hanging there with his arms above his head, chained up to this like stone wall. And what's really interesting is that when you're in the astral or the Akashics, which might actually be the astral, I don't know if that's true or not. That's just something that just came to me. But it operates like the dream world, where you get these instant downloads of information mentally. Like whenever you get into a dream, you just know what's going on. There's no background. It just happens. And the Akashic Records work the exact same way. So maybe it is in the astral. Regardless, I'm getting down wrong rabbit hole here. So I'm seeing this guy change up, and instantly I just know that this is me from a past life.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, well, this is deep. Like, what's going on here? How does this relate to the porn?
Yeah.
And as soon as I ask that, I spin, like my perception of it spins, and I see this table in the center of a room. I see what are these guards, essentially, with a woman who I instantly realize is my wife, laying on a table, and they're all essentially having their way with her.
Wow.
Brutal.
Wow. Wow.
Absolute brutal. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, instantly you just feel this rush of like just knowing, like, that's my wife. I fucked up. She's getting brutally sexually assaulted by these men. I can't do anything to protect her.
Oh.
And so, yeah, dude, just
Oof.
horrific.
Gnarly.
And so the next thing is I was just like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why would this happen?
Yeah.
And instantly the book flips to a different page, and I'm immersed in another watercolor, but like in the image instantly. And I see myself kneeling before a king. And I don't know what happened or what was said, but then I notice I turn off to the side. And as I do, I instantly know that I somehow lied to this king. I somehow fabricated the truth a little bit. I didn't tell him the whole truth. And then the book instantly flashed back to me being in the dungeon. And the message essentially that came into me was, because you lied to this king or didn't tell him the whole truth, this is what's happening to your wife.
Wow.
And I was like, fuck.
Wow.
Because telling the truth was a big thing at this time as well.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, what do we do? And what came to me instantly was like this childhood trauma parts work that I had done with psilocybin. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do that, but with me chained up to this wall. So I say, hey, what's up, man? And it's interesting. He looks up to me, like noticing me or acknowledging me. And I'm like, well, that's kind of creepy. But then I'm like, hey man, like, I'm you from the future. Like, I'm here, man. Like, this is why all of this stuff happened. It's okay. Everything will be all right. Like, I still love you. This lady still loves you. Like, so we're all good. And, just this release. And so then, the audio tape, which I subconsciously completely forgot about. I don't even know what was said during that whole transmission. But roughly around the time that I had finished talking to him, the audiobook is like, okay, now I want you to close the book, put it back on the shelf, leave the library, say thank you to the librarian, and, when you're ready, open your eyes. And man, I felt great. It reduced instantly my porn addiction from, looking at it, let's say once a day, to not even looking at it for like the next 3 weeks.
Wow.
Just instantly. And I didn't even realize it until I went to grab my phone to look at porn again. I was like, holy shit, wait, this has been 2.5, 3 weeks since I looked at this.
Wow.
I was like, what changed? And that's whenever it was like, oh shit, like you released all of this in that moment. And so that was profound. And there's a whole bunch more to that story, but I go check out my podcast on it. Search Akashic Records story. Yeah.
That's wild, man.
That was a crazy one.
What a wild, it's interesting too. So it's like sort of this trauma from another life is somehow now a fetish in this life in some way.
It's all connected, man.
Yeah, it's all connected. Well done on going into the shadow and being willing to face it and transmute it. And I think that's a big part of all of our journey, right? Like, what I think of a friend who one time shared about doing ayahuasca or something, and they were going through the hallway with doors, and they would be able to look in and see their lifetimes and things they'd done. And then it's like, he goes to one and like, I don't know if you're ready to see this one. And he opens it and it's like all this dark stuff that, his soul had experienced and participated in. And so it's like, our souls are, what we are is not for the faint of heart. And integrating, transmuting, a big part of that, I think, is paramount to our, yes, becoming our next greatest and greatest version of ourselves. And so I applaud you for not only facing that, doing that work, but then having the courage to share it. And it says a lot about you and where you're at. And it certainly is helpful to, I'm positive, others. I mean, myself for sure. So it's like, it's, yeah, very admirable share.
Appreciate it. Yeah. And, that's another, I think there's these lessons that kind of pop up throughout our lives where when we're ready for it, it'll present itself.
Yeah.
And, you know, tied up into that, it's the power of vulnerability as well,
Yeah.
which as men, this society does not cultivate the idea of vulnerability being powerful.
Yeah.
Cultivates the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Cultivates that it's weakness, that it's not. And the fact that I can sit here and be open about any and every skeleton in my closet is one of the most empowering things that I could give to people. And I know it's not an easy path, but
Yeah.
through the podcast, through conversations like this, I know that it's powerful. It empowers me,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that it'll help other people who are listening too, which amplifies me even more to share it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing, my friend. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share. What's the best way for people to connect? Obviously, tell them, where to find the podcast, social media, etc.
Yeah, the podcast is Traveling to Consciousness. Go to my website, claytoncuteri.com or travelingtoconsciousness.com. Currently undergoing some maintenance there, but within the next few months, that'll be much smoother. As of right now, to buy the book, you can go to the link tree, which is linktr.ee/Clayton Cuteri. And there will be a link there so that you can purchase the book. It's super dope. There's also a notebook that I kind of put together with it. It's super basic, but it'll help you keep organization of your lessons as you're learning.
Cool.
Because my whole thing, and especially this goes back to trying and testing it for yourself, read what I say, but don't accept it if it doesn't resonate with you. And instead, this worksheet, in my opinion, you can then say, okay, this reminded me of this time in my life. Like, let me write that down. And so over time, as you come back, like we were saying, it'll enable you to see the bigger picture that's unfolding within your life, and at the end of the day grant you deeper wisdom to evolve to the best of your ability.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I do have one final question here for you, and it is this. It's my cliche closer.
Cliche closer. I like it.
In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Clayton Cuteri?
To rejoin with God.
Mm.
And to do that, we need to release all of our desires.
Yeah, love that. And then until separation ensues again, intrigues us again. It's like the the breathing in and out of God, separation, unification. I believe this is like the dance that we are in the midst of now and will be forevermore.
Yeah.
So,
and just, I know that was a pretty short answer, but just find a way to have fun with it, because I know there's heavy stuff. We talked about heavy stuff on this podcast, but it's all orchestrated and set up to the best of your ability and God's ability, because you guys are working together. You've got your own communication with God. He's here to help you. You're here to tell him what you want to experience.
Yeah.
So have fun with it. It doesn't all have to be dark night of the soul and trauma and this. You can enjoy it. And I think that's where it comes to desires, because if we have desires and we're constrained by our desires, I want to be on every podcast in the world, I want to have this type of car, I want to have the most beautiful woman. It's like, if those things don't happen, now you're going to find yourself in despair, and these aren't going to be fun. So when you have thoughts, just say, hey God, like, let's try that out, let's do that, and then just enjoy whatever happens, because if it's for your highest self, it will. If it isn't, then it won't. And either way, you can have fun with either.
Yeah, I think I like to talk about that as, like, a lot of people even say expectation is like the enemy, and it's like, I don't believe that. It's like, it's the attachment to it that's the issue. So desires are a natural part of existence, and it's when we get overly attached or fixated where it becomes problematic. And
Yeah, and not to drag this on, but like, yeah, especially with like expectations, like that's something that I've seen a lot in the dating culture because single right now is trying to figure that out. And a lot of times they're like, well, yeah, I don't want to have any expectations. So like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa, like we need to have expectations. If we're going to do this, we
yeah,
need to have certain expectations of each other. You're not going to
yeah.
do this. You're not going to do that. Like, I don't want to be talking to you if you're talking to 20 other guys. Like those are
What are your boundaries?
expectations.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
are our boundaries, and do they align? And there's no right or wrong. It's like, it's all feedback, like,
Exactly.
and letting, and I think that's the thing where people get hung up, is in, well, my expectation should be your expectation. And, it's like it's feedback. You're getting the data you need. That which is like unto itself is drawn. You will find something that is the right match for you. Don't try and force a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. And that's the power of the expectations because then you're going to be 2 years into it, the relationship. You didn't set any expectations and now you're living according to their expectations and you're going to be miserable because of it. And if I might plug one more thing, I also do
Sure.
one-on-one coaching.
Oh,
So
cool.
if
Awesome.
anyone's trying to work with me, I got that too.
Cool. We'll put a link to your website here and the show notes. And yeah, Clayton, this has been awesome, buddy. Thank you so much for doing the work that you do and sharing your wisdom and insights. Been super cool.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I'm already looking forward to whenever some time frees up on your end to come on my pod.
We will make it happen. We will make it happen. Thank all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts as well. Until next time, journey well.